Welcome to our Ukrainian Dynamics 365 and Power Platform user group Meetup. Here we discuss different technical topics related to Dynamics 365 applications, both CRM and ERP, Power Platform, and other related technical tech. We host meetups in Ukrainian or in English, and we try to meet each 2 weeks. And Maxim Ponomarov and Valentin Gasenko helps us with that. So thank you very much, guys. Please also know that we are recording this event. The video you can find later on our YouTube channel. And today's speaker is Daniel, a Power Platform developer advocate at Microsoft. Will tell us about custom connectors in Power Platform. So Daniel, thank you very much for joining us today. Please.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, please start the presentation.
Sure. Let me share my deck here. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see.
Is it visible? Okay, that's good. So let me get the chat back. Okay. So today I'm going to talk about custom connectors. I don't know how many of you already built custom connectors. Did you already do that? Or is it completely new for you? If you can let me know that in the chat, that would be great. Okay, I see for some it's new. Well, I'll see the answers in a little bit. So custom connectors are a really cool feature of the Power Platform, and it helps you to extend the Power Platform. So whenever the Power Platform doesn't cover your needs, so when, for instance, the connectors that you have there aren't enough for you, then you can create your own connectors. And that's something that's really cool because it is really extensible for the Power Platform. And that makes it possible for you to also include connectors to different APIs that are not public, for instance, or when they are not in the Power Platform itself. Let me talk a little bit about myself first. My name is Daniel Laskowitz. I am a Power Platform developer advocate at Microsoft. I recently switched to Microsoft. I used to work for a company called Society. It's a French consulting company. I live in the Netherlands, and that's also why I have a user group there. So we have Power Addicts NL, which is the Dutch user group for all things business apps. And I'm also an independent publisher of all kinds of connectors. And I'll talk a little bit more about the independent publisher part later in this presentation. But for now, let's go on with the agenda. I'll start with explaining what is a connector, why would you use custom connectors, how to develop a connector. I'll go through it step by step. I'll tell you about all the different connector types that are out there. I'll talk about the independent publisher connector program. I'll talk a little bit about the tools that you can use. At the end, I'll give you a lot of resources, and then I'll wrap up the session. So first, what is a connector? There are tons of connectors in the Microsoft space. So the one we're talking about now is a connector for the Power Platform. Of course, there are a bunch of other connectors inside of Teams, inside of Office 365, inside of Azure, all kinds of things. But this time we're talking about Power Platform connectors, and that's a formal definition of a REST API. So if you have a REST API, you can create a definition of that and then use that within the Power Platform. It's basically a translation service that helps you to let the REST service talk to other products. So if you want to talk to Power Apps, Power Automate, Logic Apps, you can do that. You can have triggers, you can have actions, you can have all kinds of things in there that will make it easy for the Power Platform and Logic Apps to use these connectors. And there are already more than 800 connectors here. This is the slide that I always have to update because every couple of weeks there's a bunch more connectors, and that's why this slide always gets updated. This morning I checked, and there are like 805 or 810 different connectors out there, and it's a lot because a couple months back there were like 500, 600. So there's been a huge uptake in connectors. So that's also good to know. And if you look at the right side of the slide, the Open API file, which you can use, that's basically the definition of the API, together with the API properties and the binary file, which can be an icon, for instance, that's all together is a connector. And I'll show you that a little bit later in the presentation as well. So why would you use custom connectors? Custom connectors are really, really interesting when there are services that you want to talk to that are not supported yet, that are not available yet inside of the Power Platform. There have been a bunch of services that aren't in the Power Platform. For instance, for us in the Netherlands, a lot of people in the Netherlands use ServiceNow, but there's also a big group of people that use a different tool for that. And ServiceNow is available in the Power Platform, but the other tool, Topdesk, is not available in the Power Platform. So in that case, you would create a custom connector that you can add to your Power Platform environment, and then you have a supporting custom connector for that service. Also, another scenario where a lot of people would use custom connectors is when connectors don't have the trigger or action that you want. A while back, there was in the Microsoft Teams connector, there was a lack of an action called add a new team or create a team. That was something that wasn't available in the Teams connector. And a lot of people created custom connectors just for that purpose. So they created a custom connector with one action, and that's create a team. And that's what they all did. A lot of people in the Microsoft 365 space created that connector and added that to their environment. So that's also a scenario which you can use. Custom connectors are pretty simple to build. They don't require a lot of coding. You can do it with no code actually within custom connectors. Some people would say it's low code because you use JSON in the custom connectors. And yeah, a lot of people call that not coding, but some people do. So I will leave that to the people to decide on that. But it can be really simple to build them. What is really interesting about this is when they are simple to build, you still need to maintain them. And maintenance of connectors is not simple at all. So you still need to think about maintainability. So what happens when you add an action and later on it gets decommissioned or it gets changed? What do you do then? So it's simple to build one connector. I'm going to show that in a demo a little bit later as well. It's really easy to do that, but still maintainability is still a thing. It's not as easy as you'd expect. You can build a connector using the wizard. There's a UI wizard which you can use, and we'll use that later on as well. You can also import a Postman collection. So when you like Postman to work with that, you can just create a collection there, and then you can export it and import it into the Power Platform. You can also start from Visual Studio Code. It's not the easiest way to do that. We are looking at things to make it more easy to do that. And the other one is, of course, you can do Notepad or something like that if you want, but that's even harder because you don't have IntelliSense and etc. Yeah, I would suggest start building it using the wizard. That's the easiest. And then whenever you're almost done, you can export and do some stuff there as well within Visual Studio Code, for instance. And then you can move on from there. You can share a custom connector, you can package it, and you can certify it through GitHub. So if you create a custom connector and you want to make that available for other people as well, you can do that. So if you have your own service and you have a connector for that, and you want to certify that, that's possible through GitHub. And the independent publisher program is also an interesting one because you don't have to be the owner of the service that you're connecting to create a independent publisher connector. But we'll talk a little bit later about that as well. So to develop a connector, here's a step-by-step guide. First, you need, of course, to read the docs and know the API that you want to build the connector for. If you know all about the API, then it will be easier to build the connector, of course. You need to start in one of the products. So you can start from the Power Apps Maker portal, the Power Automate Maker portal, or from Logic Apps. And you can go through the wizard in there. You need to set up the authentication. So if you have OAuth 2.0, for instance, as an authentication type, you can use that there. We are going to use an anonymous authentication method in the demo later on, but there are a bunch of other options as well. So if you have an API key on your API, you can do that as well. You can define the operations after that. So when you have set up the authentication, you go to the operations tab and you can add actions and triggers in there. The actions and triggers are the things that show up inside of Power Apps, Power Automate, and Logic Apps. So those are in Power Automate, for instance, and in Logic Apps, those are the blocks that you see and that you search for. And then after that, you can also add code if you want to. There are possibilities to transform the input, for instance, or the output from the API, and you can do that with C# code. So that's available now, and you can use that as well. And of course, at the end, save and test your connector. Testing your connector is one of the most important things that you need to do, because that way you can see what the end user will experience, and that will make it easier for you to understand the frustrations or maybe the joys of using your connector. So that's why you need to really test your connector as well. So for the first step, look at the API docs. You really need to search for them. A lot of good APIs have good documentation. At the right side, you can see the Spotify API, for instance. They have a really extensive documentation portal where you can find all things about all the objects that come back from the API, all the queries that you need to send to the API, etc. There's a bunch of things in there. They have all kinds of sample values. So that's really nice. And the most or the best APIs have those documentation available. There are also APIs that don't have a lot of documentation, and those are the most difficult ones, because then you need to try and see what comes back from the API, what goes into the API, etc. And that requires a lot more work. So yeah, if you want to start building your first connector, I would pick a good API that has a lot of documentation. But yeah, sometimes that's not the best scenario. So sometimes a client just wants a connector for an API that doesn't have a lot of documentation, and then you need to do a lot with trial and error. You can start in one of the products. You can create from blank, and that's what we're going to do a little bit later as well. You can also start from an Azure service. So if you have an Azure service already available, you can just select that and import that. You can import an OpenAPI file from your own file system, or you can also import an OpenAPI file from a URL. So if you have, for instance, something on GitHub or on some kind of file storage, you can use that as well. You can import from a Postman collection, which is also interesting. One thing I need to tell you about this one is that until recently, or a couple months back, they only supported V1 Postman collections, but they also support V2 collections now. So it's a lot more easy to use that nowadays. And you can also import connectors from GitHub. And this option is a bit different than you would expect. I first expected that I would just have a GitHub browser and I could search for my connector in there and then select my connector and then import that. But it's only the GitHub repo from Microsoft. So they already have a GitHub repository with all the different connectors in there. And they also have a directory called custom connectors. And there are some connectors in there. And those are the only ones that you can import with the GitHub option in this case. So it's a little bit different than you would expect. Okay, for setting up the authentication. Yeah, in the demo that we will do later on, we will use the anonymous auth, but you can also use a lot more authentication. So you can use basic authentication where you would use username and password. You can use the API key, which is also available at a lot of APIs. You can use OAuth 2.0. And that's really interesting, especially if you are going to use the more well-known APIs, because a lot of them use OAuth 2.0, including the Graph API, Azure AD, those kinds of APIs use OAuth all the time. And there's also Windows authentication, and you can use that if you use the on-prem data gateway. So that's possible as well. Then during the define the operations for your connector step, then you need to set up all kinds of parts in there. So you can add actions in there. You can add triggers in there. You can add policy templates. Policy templates are really interesting as well. If you want to transform something, or if you want to change the host URL, you can do that with the policy template. Definitions can be viewed here as well. So definitions are really interesting because that could be like, for instance, with the Spotify connector, they have a definition for an artist. They have a definition for an album. They have a definition for all kinds of things. And they come back in the API all the time. So I want to have a definition for an artist in my connector, of course. I don't want to define the artist object all the time in every step, because then I have to maintain it at all the different places. And I want one single source of truth. So that's why definitions are really interesting. And definitions can be viewed in the operations view in the connector UI, but they can't be added. So that's something that you should be aware of. You should still do that in a different manner. So that's, yeah, for instance, for that, you need to export your connector and change all the definitions in that file and then import it again. There's also another tip I want to give you. You really need to save yourself some time and import the requests and responses from a sample payload. So if you have a good documented API, they all have samples for a request and for a response. You can easily use that to import those into your connector, and then you don't have to add them all by hand. So it's a real lifesaver, that one. So make sure to do that as well. There's also a separate tab in the UI for custom C# code. We're not going to dive deep into that during this session, but it is possible. It's one of the steps in your in the connector UI. And now let's move on to, oh, hold on. First do, oh, I did this wrong, but the last step of this is save and test your connector. It's really important to save and test your connector at the end. If you don't save it and publish your connector, it won't be available in the products, and then you would lose your work. So always hit the save button there. And testing your connector is also really important because, of course, the UI for the end user should be tested as well to see if the connector works as expected. And with that, let's move on to the demo. And let me go to the screen. Can you still see my screen?
Yeah, all good.
All good. Okay, great. So here we are in the Power Automate Maker portal. So when you go to make.powerautomate.com, you will arrive here. If you go to the data part and to custom connectors, that's where all your custom connectors will be available. I'm going to create a new custom connector here for now. But when you would do this for real, this is just for a demo, but when you do this for real, please start from solutions. You really need to start from solutions, create a new solution there, and then create a custom connector from there, because that will save you a lot of time with the ALM story. But for now, for timing reasons, we're going to start from here. I'm going to create a new custom connector from blank, and I'm going to call this Chuck Norris IO, because that's the connector we are going to build. This is a free API, and whenever we want to use this, we don't have to pay anything. You can just set or request a joke from here, and then you'll get a response back with a joke. So that's what we're going to do here. I'm going to hit continue. And then you'll see the general tab here. This is what I was talking about, where you have the code tab as well. That's where you can have the C# code, but we're now in the general part. You can upload a connector icon here. You can add a background color. You can add a description. That's all kinds of things that you can do. And if you are doing this for a customer, please do that, because it will make sure that people can recognize your connector in a good way. But for now, we're going to use the host. And I need to grab that from here, because if you look at the documentation of this API, you can see that there is a GET response, and I can copy that. And here I can just remove the unnecessary parts. So HTTPS, I don't need to add that because it's already in here. And we're just going to use api.chucknorris.io for the host. And we're going to move to the security tab. As I said, there are a bunch of authentication types. You can use no authentication, basic authentication, API key, or OAuth2. For now, I'm going to use the no authentication, and I'm going to move on to the definition. And this is where the real magic happens. So here we can create a new action, we can create a new trigger, we can create a new policy. Those are the policies that I talked about a little bit about as well. But for now, we are gonna add an action. And for this, we can use two actions here. The first one is to retrieve a joke. That's one of the actions that I want to create. And there's also another one, and that's retrieve a random Chuck Norris joke from a given category. And that's something that I'm most interested in, because I want to be able to select a category and then get a joke for that category. But I also need, of course, the list of available categories, and that's here. That's also possible here. I just saw the comment. Nice one. I'll just copy the get categories part here, and we'll use that in the part here. So I'm gonna call this get categories. Gets list of categories. and the operation ID will be get categories. What's also a really big tip is that you can click the Learn More button here. And when you do that, you will get redirected to a documentation page on the Power Platform documentation. And that's extend an open API definition. And this will help you understand where all these values that we just added. So for instance, a summary, where it will appear in the product. So here we have the summary. It says it's recommended to use sentence case for summary. And that's when an event is added to calendar or sent an email. So if we look at the summary, I did it wrong because I used multiple case letters. And for the description, there's something else. So let's open that one as well. And then with the description, it says it's also sentence case, and it will appear somewhere on a different place because the summary was, of course, at the top, and the description will be inside of a property, for instance, or at a little I for info, where you can have the description of a certain operation. So that's something that you should be aware of as well. There's also visibility. Visibility is something that you can use. We'll use it later on as well. If you have it to none, it will appear for everyone. If you add it to advanced, then you'll have the see more link, usually inside of the Power Platform experiences, and it will only show when you hit see more. Internal is when it's only available, but it doesn't show up in the Power Automate experience or in the Power Apps experience. And important is that it will always show at the top. So those are the different visibilities that you can have. I'm going to select import from sample, and I'll add the get verb here, and I'll have the URL in here. I can add some headers, but for now I'm not going to use that, and I'm going to hit import. And it will automatically import the request because I already did that. Then we have the response here, which you can also change. For now, we're not going to do that. But this is what I was expecting. We're going to add a new action. And let me look first for the right URL here. So let's copy this and add a new action and call this get Chuck Norris joke. Gets Chuck Norris joke based on category. Get joke. We're going to call this. I'm going to import from sample again. I'm going to select the get verb, and I'm going to enter the URL in here. And watch what happens. There's a little part here for category, and it has the squiggly lines around it. So whenever you hit import, it will automatically convert that to a query. So it says category in here, and we can change that around as well. So if we want to have category like this, enter category. I can change that around here, but let me go back for now. And if we scroll down, we can also add a response. For this one, I want to define a response. I'm just going to change it from default to 200, and I'm going to hit import from sample. And I need to copy the sample again from the example in here. So let me copy that, go to the body here and hit import, and it will automatically give me all the properties that are from the response. And for now, I think that this is a good connector for now. So let me create the connector. And that's a step that you never, you don't want to forget that, because this really saves your connector. If I didn't hit the button and I would close my browser, for instance, it would not save. So make sure to do that as well. Okay, it has been saved. If we go further, you can see the code part here. I have this disabled for this one, but you can enable it here and upload your code. Let's move to test. To test my connector, I need to create a connection here. So let me do that. Because I had anonymous security, that makes it possible to just create a connection and it will automatically create it without even entering any data. When you have an OAuth security, then it would be different. So then you would have to log in, etc., those kinds of things. But for now, it's just a simple connection. And I can test my operations here. So I can test the get categories step. And when I do that, I can see I get an array back with all kinds of categories that we have here. And for the joke, I can enter a category, for instance. So let me just grab one of the categories here. So let's do dev, for instance, and add that in here and test the operation. And then we'll get a value back here. And it's not really about devs, but there is a response at least. For now, I'm gonna leave it with this, but we'll come back later in another demo. So let me move back to my slides. So there we go. The type of connectors, that's also really interesting to know, because there are a bunch of them. You have the custom connector, the certified connector, and the independent publisher connector. And they all have different properties. So make sure to use the right one for your scenario. The first one is custom. That's the one that you can just deploy to your environment. And when you do that, you have to do that also by hand all the time. But this is a really good connector type when you have a private API. So if you build an API for a company and they don't want to open it up for other companies or for other people, they have a private API, then you can build a custom connector for that. And that's the connector type there. And then you can use it for internal consumption. So that makes it really easy to use within one company. That's a good one to know. The certified ones, those are the ones that are typically from a service itself. So the service owner of that API is also the connector developer. So I use the example of ServiceNow and Topdesk. If Topdesk wanted to have a certified connector, they could build one, and then they would have a certified connector. They would certify it through a Microsoft process, and then they would have their connector available for everyone that uses the PowerPlatform and Logic apps. So it will be available for them as well. And then we have the last one, and that's the independent publisher connector. And that's basically the same as certified connector, but with a big difference. And that's that the service owner, so the API owner, doesn't have to be the connector developer. So if I'm creating a Spotify connector and I don't work at Spotify, I can still submit my connector as an independent publisher connector, and it will be available for everybody around the world. That's the typical type of independent publisher. So that's one that you should really be aware of. The first one, custom connector, has a big difference where it's only internal and it has an API availability for public and private. So you can also use private APIs then. For certified and independent publisher, it's almost the same. The only difference is the service owner. Certified means they commit to support and update. Yeah, that's correct. any requirements for that during certification process, I believe it's all documented. I can send a link a little bit later, then you will see about that. But they have they have to commit to support and update. I believe there's different gradations in that, because you also have the preview tag inside of Power Automate, for instance. And when you see preview, it doesn't have as good as support as when the preview tag is not available there. So that's also a difference there. Okay. Let's move on to the next one. And that's independent publisher connectors. That's a subject that I really, really like, because before the independent publisher connectors, there were a bunch of connectors, but there weren't as many as now. So the independent publisher connector program has been around for a little bit over a year now, and I believe there's 300 more connectors since then. So it's been really a big uptake on new connectors. You could argue if they are all useful, because there's a bunch of Chuck Norris facts connectors, so more funny connectors. But it is a really big opportunity for people to create really cool connectors. You can create your own connector, and you can submit that to the Power Platform connectors GitHub repository. And after that, when you do that, there will be a validation and certification process, just like the certification scenario with the certified connectors. And then, yeah, independent publishers can be developers from companies, they can be community members, they can be people who are just attending a hackathon and they just try out Power Platform for the first time. That's all possible. So that's the big thing for independent publisher connectors. If you want to build one, you can start by looking at the top connector asks. That's on GitHub. On the Power Platform connector repo, you can look at that, and you can see which connectors have been asked for the most, and you can just choose one of those and start building that. You can, of course, start building in Power Apps, Power Automate, or Logic Apps, just the same way as I explained a little bit earlier. You need to prepare your artifacts when you're done creating your connector, because you need to submit it to GitHub. And you will submit an API definition, which is an open API file, or Swagger, how it's used to be called. You will be submitting also an API properties file. You will add a README there, and those files together can be packaged and put on GitHub. You can use the PA-con CLI, which is the Power Automate connector CLI, to download all the artifacts and add metadata such as publisher and stack owner, which you need to have in there, otherwise your pull request won't be added. And you also need to make sure that you've added summaries and descriptions for all your parameters and all your properties. And you also need to add schemas, because schemas are the most important thing of a connector. I added that at the response. I also added the schema for the Chuck Norris API. If I didn't do that, you wouldn't be able to see the dynamic content in the dynamic content block when you are in Power Automate or in Power Apps with IntelliSense. So that's also really important to add all the different schemas in there, because otherwise people need to, for instance, use a parse JSON file, a parse JSON action to get all the blocks available in there. Then you need to submit it to GitHub. You need to create a pull request and title it connector name independent publisher. Let me see. Can we use PA-con tool in CI/CD pipeline? Yeah, you can use it in a CI/CD pipeline as well. There is a blog about it, I believe, on the Power Automate blog. I can look it up and send it in the chat later on as well. So that will help you as well. I would also suggest look at the Power Platform CLI, because the Power Platform CLI will eventually get the PACon CLI functionality in there. And I believe it will be in September that they are going to release that. Because it's already in the release notes, and it also makes sense that they have one CLI instead of multiple CLIs, of course. The interesting part with the CI/CD pipelines is that the Power Platform build tools, they also use the Power Platform CLI. And when the PACon CLI stuff is in there, then probably we will have some actions in the Power Platform build tools as well for that. So that will make it easier for your CI/CD pipeline. Yeah, so create your pull request and title it connector name with independent publisher behind it so that people can recognize that it is an independent publisher connector. You need to paste screenshots in your pull request because then they can see that your connector is actually working. Otherwise, they won't. They will have to test it all themselves. So Microsoft also wants you to do some of the work. You don't need to submit an icon because there is an independent publisher connector icon, and you can see that at the top right corner. That's the beautiful orange with white color. So every connector has the same color in there. We hope that it will change in the future, but for now it's this icon. Upon submission, you will also see a Swagger validator. So whenever you created a pull request, it will run that validator, and you can see if your Swagger file, your OpenAPI file, really works or not. If it fails, they will come back to you and ask you to change some things. When you have submitted your PR, Microsoft will take a look at it. All the certification engineers they have, they will test your connector and check if the connector is of a good quality. And they will usually come back to you and they will put comments in your pull request. So make sure to answer those comments as well, because otherwise your connector will not be certified. It will take at least 2 weeks, but sometimes it takes up to a month or maybe even more. I believe they now have not a big pipeline, so it should be between 2 to 4 weeks. You also need to look at the GitHub labels, because every pull request will get a GitHub label, and it can go from validation phase to certification phase and to deployment phase. So when it is in deployment phase, it will take a couple of days before the connector will appear inside of Power Automate, Power Apps, and Logic Apps. And whenever you're done, you can, of course, submit an update whenever you want to. So if there's a new action you want to add, you can do that after that as well. And then the more important stuff will come, and that's the time to show off your connector step. You really want to check out your connector in product. Is it really working as you intended it to be? You can create samples, so you can create, for instance, your own solutions that use your connector and show them off to people. You can share your connector through LinkedIn and Twitter. There will be a blog every month, and in that blog, your connector will be shown as well. And there are multiple opportunities to demo. So this is also an opportunity to be in community calls, for instance. And when you show your connector, there's a large audience that looks at those calls. So for instance, the PMP, Patterns and Practices, Microsoft Dev Call, that's every 2 weeks. And you can show off your connector there. And there's usually a couple hundred of people that are attending those calls. And there's also a bunch of people who watch the recordings later on. So it's a really good opportunity to show off your great connector skills. And you can also apply for getting a YouTube video recording for the Microsoft Dev channel on YouTube. So it will appear on those channels as well. A little bit about the tools. The PACon CLI, I already talked a little bit about it. It helps with the ALM story of custom connectors. You can download your connector, you can upload your connector, you can update it, you can create it, you can do all kinds of things there. And that helps a lot with the with the development of connectors. One thing I need to talk about is the PACon update. That doesn't really work as well as you would expect it. Sometimes the updates take a little while before it works. So it can take up to 24 hours even if some updates come through. And that's really annoying when you are creating a custom connector, of course. So have patience, or make sure to create a new connector every time and delete it. It's not the best way of doing it, but it can save you some time. And also another tool that I want to highlight is the PowerPlatform connectors VS Code extension. There usually isn't a lot of stuff available for Visual Studio Code if you're working with PowerPlatform connectors. So I created a Visual Studio Code extension, and you can easily add multiple snippets to your connector, and that makes it easier for you to create new operations inside of Visual Studio instead of going to the UI and back and forth again. So that will save some time as well. Let me move on to the demo because I'm almost out of time. So let's switch to my demo. And here I'm gonna show you that I can download the connector. And let me see if I can still log in. Oh, there we go. I need to log in and add the code. And I hope it will work. Yeah, there we are. Okay. So let's move back to my terminal. I hope you can see it. Is it readable?
Yeah, all good.
Okay, good. So I am already in my connectors directory on my machine. So let me just download the connector. And if you add PACon download, you can also add a lot of parameters, but for now, we're not going to use that. I'm going to choose the community demos environments that I have. And oh, it's not showing up. That's weird. Let me see if I did it all right. Ah, that's interesting. Normally, it should show me my Chuck Norris connector, but it doesn't show. Looks like there's a bug. Let's see if I can do it differently. Come in again. It is successful. Downloads. No. Let me see if I can do a different one. I hope I have some here. Ah, good. I have the Chuck Norris API available here as well. And that's a different environment. But if I go to Visual Studio Code now, I already have the connectors directory open, and you can see that there's a shared Chuck Norris directory here now, and that's what got exported right now. And you can see that there's an API definition.swagger.json, and I can see that there is a categories endpoint and a random endpoint. One is for getting a joke, and one is for getting the categories. And if we go back to the environment, let me show that. Let me switch to that environment. See if I can move from here. So let me add a cloud flow. And let me open up the Chuck Norris one. There we go. We have retrieve a joke. And oh, it doesn't work as expected. That's a little bit annoying for the demo, but you can use certain parameters. So for instance, we have the random part here, and that's to get a joke. And when you normally have the category here, it will have just a normal text input, and you can add a category in there. But for now, for some reason, it doesn't work. So let me try and fix that, because I'm going to add another property in here, and I need to copy and paste that from my notes. And let me add that here, save it. So what you can see now is that I added the XMS dynamic values property here. And you can see that there's an operation ID property in there that has the get categories name in there. So let me check also if this is going to be a good one. And that's not going to be the good one. In here, it's called list categories. So let me change that. And what this does, it will create a dropdown, which will load all the categories from the categories endpoint. And it will show that in the dropdown that I just saw. So let me try and upload this. BACon update. And I need to see, it will give me an error, probably. So let's add 5 and 2. API properties should be there. Okay, oh, let me cd into the right directory. Okay. API prop and API. Okay, let's see if this will work. Oh, API definition should be there as well. .json. That one. That's Swagger to JSON. Oh, it's not working. Did I do something wrong? API definition. What is happening here? Oh, I did a wrong thing here. Let's try it again. API definition .swagger.json. Now I can probably get it to work. 5 and 2. Connector selected, and it's going to update it. Okay, it updated. So let's go back to my environment. Let's edit this one. And let's see if I can get the retrieve a joke to work. And there we are. It shows the category and it shows all the different stuff in there. So for instance, career. And when I save this one and test it, yeah, more troubleshooting than I liked, but here we go. Let's continue and run the flow. And if all goes well, it should give me a response here. And it would give me, in the beginning, there was nothing. Then Chuck Norris roundhouse kicked that nothing in the face and said, get a job. That is the story of the universe. And that's the joke that we got from here. So let me move back to presentation and wrap up because we're already through the time. I have a couple of resources here. I have a docs page where you can find everything about connectors, and I'll share the slides later. I don't know how they will be uploaded, but I'll make sure to share them later so that you can click on all the links. There's a docs page, certified connector part. You can go to the GitHub repository where you can submit your own connector as well. One very important docs page is the extend and open API definition page. That's the one where you could see summary and description and where that all ends up in the product. That's a good one. Custom code and custom connectors is also an interesting one to take a look at. Create a connector from a Postman collection. That's also a guide that you can follow to import your own Postman collection into a connector. Custom connector coding standards are also very important because that will make your connector a lot more consistent. Policy support is also a part that you can look into. And of course, the two tools that I was talking about, PACon CLI and PowerPlatform connectors VS Code extension, those are available here as well. And with that, I would like to wrap up and thank you for the attendance. If you have some questions, you can always ask them.
Yeah, thank you very much, Daniel. There are some questions in the chat.
Okay. Can you say something about headers and policies? Yeah, you can always add the headers to the operations if you want to. You can also use the policies to change those headers. Those are available in the documentation that I said a little bit earlier as well. So if you go to, let me see, which one was it? Yeah, to this one, the policy support one. If you go there, then you will see that there is a bunch of things in here where you can change HTTP headers, for instance. Those are the policy templates that you can use, for instance, in your connector as well. So if you want to change your header, you can do that with the set HTTP header policy template. Another one. What are the license requirements for the use of different types of custom connectors in an organization? They are all premium connectors. There is one little thing that's different though. If you have Dataverse for Teams, you are able to publish a connector to your environment from API management. And if you do that, then nobody needs to have the premium connector. So that's one little thing that's different, but it can have a huge impact. So yeah, if you have that possibility and you want to create a Power App or a flow inside of a team in Dataverse for Teams, you can use that to kind of bypass the licensing requirements. So that's not a premium connector in that case. Let me see. Did I miss something? I already answered the support and update one and the CI/CD pipelines. So that's it, I guess.
Yeah, so does it mean that each custom connector that I download from the marketplace, it will be like it should be premium?
Yeah, every custom connector, certified connector, and the independent publisher connectors, they are all premium.
Okay.
Except a couple of them, and those are mostly the Microsoft connectors. For instance, Office 365 Outlook. That's one that's included in product.
Yeah, and also it is regarding the Microsoft Teams. So if we are talking about automatization and chatbot, then it's also free.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you have to pay a lot of money for the license.
Correct. Yeah, and there's one little change. I don't know if I can find it really quickly, but Power Apps, Dataverse for Teams, blog. There was something. Let me see. API management. I think it's in here. So yeah, this is the one. There's a blog here. It's called, oh, let me go up. API management connector on the Power Platform. It's a pretty old blog, by the way. It's almost 2 years old. And it talks about the API management, Azure API management that you can use. And you can publish connectors from there. And there's one little sentence here. And that citizen developers can use those API management backed connectors in Power Apps hosted in Teams through the existing Teams licensing. And that's the big escape that you have here. I don't think a lot of people use it, by the way. So if you want free connectors there, try it out. And yeah, that's a good option to get some free custom connectors in there.
Yeah, but this will mean that they probably will all be in the Teams environment. It will be separate environment.
Yeah.
Okay,
So,
okay.
and you can publish them to multiple environments. So you can publish them to different environments as well. So if you have one connector and you want to have it in multiple teams, for instance, you can do that through API management as well.
Okay.
But you still need to pay for API management, which is also a cost, but it can be way cheaper than 50,000 people having premium licenses or 5,000 people having premium licenses. So I think this is a good one.
Yeah, and I think also that some licenses, they already include the premium connector. So if you just buy Power Automate, Power Apps, then you will have these licenses, so you can save some money.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah, so any other questions, guys? No?
Someone is typing, so let's wait for that for a little bit.
Okay.
Okay, good. Well, thanks a lot for being here, and all the best with the user group.
Yeah, thank you very much, Daniel, for taking the time and sharing your knowledge about the custom connectors. Yeah, I hope that you will join us later in any other meetup. Yeah,
sure.
To continue
Would love
this
to.
topic, or thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you,
Daniel. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.